Basketball Index podcast come out. They did an episode recently on the top 10 most valuable pickups of the offseason in free agency. And they ranked Buddy Hield number 1 out of all the offseason signings. The most valuable. Where I think, is it Taylor Wyman, I think it was, hosting that episode that's labelled Buddy Hield's 4-year, $37 million contract as insane and doesn't make sense. So that's great. That is great. But I do think it's overstated a little bit the impact that he can have, because I think everyone just thinks, okay, they're going to replace Klay's three-point shooting with Buddy Hield's three-point shooting, and therefore Buddy Hield's going to have a big role. Not necessarily the same as Klay, but a big role nonetheless, like Monty Poole saying 22 to 28 minutes per game. I just think it's overstated, and here's why. So Klay averaged 9 three-point attempts last season. So Buddy Hield comes in. Is he going to take the majority of that? I don't necessarily think so. Just looking at a few other players here that are going to potentially try and make up the 9 3-point attempts per game. And the Warriors might not even necessarily need to. They might look at playing a different style where JK is more involved. He's obviously trying to get to the rim more. Therefore, the Warriors aren't taking as many threes necessarily as what they have done in the past. But let's just say you are trying to make up the 9 threes that Klay's departure brings. Start with pods. This is all based on whether the roster remaining the same, right? If they trade for Markkanen, then Markkanen comes in. He's probably taking 7, 8 threes a game, and therefore you're nearly making up Klay's number anyway. But this is based on the current roster. So pods averaged 3.2 3-point attempts per game last season. That's going to soar. If he's still on the roster, that's going to soar, because he's going to be playing 30 minutes a game. He's going to be playing more minutes again than he did last season, where he averaged, 26 or something already. But we saw in Summer League, huge emphasis on him taking more threes. And he took 6 or 7 per game across his 3 outings, shot 40% from deep. Now, will he be able to shoot 40% during the regular season next season? Probably not. Maybe not, especially if the volume's high. But I do think the volume will be high. I think it's going to jump from 3.2 to at least 5, maybe closer to 6. So all of a sudden, there's at least 2 threes a game in addition. Melton comes in. He's averaged over 5 3-point attempts in his last 3 NBA seasons. So I'm penciling him in. He's probably if he's fully healthy and available, I think he's taking 5 threes a game. So between Pods and Melton, there's at least 7.5 threes per game. The other one that I think is the most underrated one out of all this, who really needs to get back to being not just a good 3-point shooter efficiency-wise, but a high-volume 3-point shooter, is Andrew Wiggins, right? And I think Draymond came out on his podcast and said he expects a bounce-back season from Wiggs, and much of that has to do with his 3-point shooting. Here are the numbers, attempts-wise, from Andrew Wiggins in the past few seasons. It goes 6.2, 5.2, 5.5, 6.1, and 3.6. That's a huge outlier, that 3.6. Everything else is between 5.2 and 6.2 3-point attempts per game, and he had 3.6 3-point attempts per game last season. So history would show you that Wiggs should be getting back to 5 or 6 3-point attempts per game next season. So all of a sudden, there's another 2 3-pointers. And between Pods, Melton, and Wiggs, there's around the 9 3-pointers that you're missing from Klay. And that's not factoring in Buddy Hield whatsoever. Then you got Moses Moody. If he's still on the roster, I'd hope that he's playing more minutes again next season. He averaged 3 3-point attempts per game last season. If he plays any kind of significant minutes where he's averaging 20 minutes a game, that's going to jump to 4 or 5 3-point attempts per game. He's one of the best shooters on the Warriors roster, which might say more about the Warriors roster than Moses necessarily, but nonetheless, that's a fact. So all of a sudden, you're talking about a number of players who are going to take major leaps 3-point wise. And I get they're not necessarily going to be the absolute genuine sharpshooter that Buddy Hield is, and that you're going to need Buddy Hield in certain scenarios. Absolutely. But I do think it's overstated a little bit the fact that, okay, Klay's 9 threes per game, they're out the window. And so you're just going to bring in this one guy who's going to do the exact same